The envelope was sitting on my windshield when I came out of the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon. No name on it. Just my license plate number written on the front in blue ink. Inside was a single index card with a phone number and 4 words, "We need to talk." I almost threw it away. Glad I didn't. The number belonged to a man named Derek. He said he'd been watching my car in that parking lot for 2 weeks waiting for the right moment. He knew my routine because his wife had described it in detail. His wife, who worked at the architecture firm where my wife, Dana, had been a project manager for 3 years. Derek's wife was named Camille. She and Dana had been close enough that Dana attended their wedding anniversary dinner last spring. I remember she came home talking about what a lovely couple they were. His voice was steady on the phone, the kind of steady that comes from practicing what you're going to say for days. He told me Dana and a man named Elliot had been meeting twice a week at a short-term rental near the waterfront. Elliot was a contractor the firm used regularly. Camille had noticed the mileage on Dana's car didn't match her reported client visits. She'd hired someone to look into it. What they found involved my wife. Derek said he was sorry to be the one telling me. I said don't be. We met the next morning at a diner near the highway, far enough from anywhere either of us might be recognized. Derek was a tall, quiet man in his late 40s. He slid a folder across the table without preamble. His hands were calm. His eyes weren't. The photos were dated, time-stamped, precise. Dana's silver Volvo parked 2 streets over from a building on Harbor Road. Dana entering through a side gate at 1:10 p.m. Elliot arriving 8 minutes earlier. The investigator had noted that the visits ran between 90 minutes and 2 hours. Every Tuesday and Thursday for at least 5 months. 5 months. I'd been married to Dana for 11 years. I sat with the folder open in front of me and thought about the last 5 months. The new yoga class she'd joined that ran conveniently from noon to 2 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The way her phone now lived face down on every surface. The weekend she said a work project had her stressed and unreachable, and I'd made her soup and left it on the counter with a note because I thought she needed space. Derek told me Camille's investigator had done something else. Elliot was married too. His wife's name was Rose. She lived 40 minutes north of the city in the house they'd bought together 8 years ago. The investigator had found her because Elliot's truck was registered to a joint address. Derek had already contacted Rose. She was coming down Friday. Rose arrived in a pickup truck with mud on the tires and a calm on her face that I recognized immediately. It's the calm that settles in after the worst of the shock has already passed and what's left is just the logistics of destruction. She'd known something was wrong for months. Elliot had started taking his phone into the bathroom. He'd started complimenting her cooking with an enthusiasm that felt performed. He bought her earrings for no occasion. The investigator's report had confirmed what her body had apparently already understood. The 4 of us sat in Derek and Camille's living room. 3 betrayed people and Camille, who'd started this whole chain of events by noticing mileage on a company car. We compared what we knew. Elliot had told Rose he was on job sites Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. He'd been billing those hours to the architecture firm, which meant he'd also been defrauding a client, which meant there was a paper trail that had nothing to do with private investigators or hidden cameras. Just invoices for work performed during hours he was in a rented apartment with my wife. Derek's folder had something else in it. A real estate search history pulled from Elliot's email, which Camille's investigator had accessed through a password Elliot had once written on a sticky note she'd kept. He and Dana had been browsing waterfront condos. Not casually. With a saved search, a budget filter, and a shared folder of listings they'd starred together. I went home that night and sat in the kitchen and looked at the house Dana and I had renovated together the year before our son was born. We'd argued about the tile in the bathroom for 3 weekends. She'd been right about the tile. My son was 7. I called my brother that night. He drove over without asking why. He sat with me until 3 a.m. and didn't tell me what to do, which was the only thing I needed. The plan was straightforward. We wouldn't tip them off. We wouldn't confront by phone or text where they could control the narrative. Derek's investigator had confirmed they met every Tuesday at 1 p.m., Elliot first, Dana 10 minutes after. The rental was a ground floor unit in a converted warehouse. The building manager had never met either of them, only the property management company they booked through. It had been paid 6 months in advance through a third-party platform. Rose had something none of us expected. Elliot had given her his backup phone to use while hers was being repaired last fall. He'd factory reset it, but not before the iCloud backup had already synced to her laptop. Rose was an IT coordinator. She'd restored the backup on a spare device and spent 2 weeks going through it methodically, the way you do a job, not a heartbreak. She had everything. Texts between Elliot and Dana going back 14 months. Not 5 months. 14. She had the messages where they discussed me specifically. Where Dana had called our marriage comfortable but hollow. Where Elliot had said Rose would never figure it out because she trusted him completely. He wasn't wrong about that part. Rose didn't cry when she told us this. She just set her phone on the table and let us read. Tuesday came the way those days always do, too slowly and then all at once. I told Dana I had a site visit running late. She said her Thursday yoga instructor had added a Tuesday makeup class. We kissed in the kitchen. I watched her pull out of the driveway. Derek, Rose, and I drove separately and met on a block over from Harbor Road at 12:50 p.m. The investigator was parked down the street confirming both cars were already there. We walked to the building at 1:22 p.m. Rose had Elliot's spare key from the backup phone's photos. He'd sent Dana a photo of it when he first had a copy made, a detail so careless it almost felt like a dare. The key worked. The unit was dim, blinds half drawn. Living room to the left. A kitchen that smelled like coffee that had been made that morning. Dana's coat was on the hook by the door. Her work bag on the chair. A bottle of wine on the counter, already open. Derek and I looked at each other. Rose was already moving toward the back of the apartment. She pushed the door open without knocking. I don't need to describe what we saw in detail. What I'll say is that Dana saw me first, and in the fraction of a second before she could rearrange her face, I saw something I'll never forget. Not guilt, not panic. Calculation. Even then, even in that moment, she was already working out what to say. Elliot scrambled backward. Rose looked at him the way you look at something that used to matter. Nobody screamed. That surprised me. I'd expected screaming. Derek set the folder on the dresser. The photos, the timelines, the real estate listings, the billing records with the fraudulent hours highlighted. Rose set her phone on top of it, open to the text thread. 14 months of it. Dana said my name. I shook my head. She said it was complicated. I said it didn't look complicated. Elliot started talking about how these things happen, how people fall into situations. Rose told him to stop talking. He stopped. I picked up Dana's coat from the hook by the door. I set it on the floor outside the unit in the hallway. I did the same with her work bag. Then I walked out and left the door open behind me. I'd spoken with a family law attorney 2 days before. I hadn't told Dana I was going. I'd scheduled it the same afternoon Derek first called me, while I was still sitting in the grocery store parking lot rereading that index card. My lawyer had been clear. Don't change the locks. Don't remove her from accounts unilaterally. Document everything and let the legal process be the thing that handles it. He'd also said, given what I was about to have on record, the custody and asset picture looked straightforward. My son was at my brother's place that Tuesday. I'd told him Dad had some work to sort out and he'd get to stay up late watching movies. He was fine with that. Dana came home at 4 p.m. Her key worked. I'd respected the law even when I didn't want to. She walked in and I was sitting at the kitchen table with my lawyer on speaker. She tried to talk. My lawyer advised her that anything she said could be documented. She went upstairs. I heard the shower running for a long time. She came down an hour later wanting to have a conversation. I had a legal notepad in front of me. I told her I was documenting the conversation and asked if she wanted to proceed. She looked at the notepad. She went back upstairs. The text started at 6 p.m. She was sorry. She'd been lost. It had no bearing on how she felt about me, about our son. She wanted to fix it. She wanted to go to counseling. She'd end it permanently, it was already over, she'd realized it had been a mistake for months. 4 months ago she'd starred a 2-bedroom waterfront condo and sent Elliot a message saying this is the one. I didn't respond to any of the texts. I slept in the guest room with the door locked, not because I was afraid of her, but because I was afraid of myself saying something in the dark that I couldn't take back. The law firm learned about Elliot's billing fraud on Wednesday. Rose had sent the invoices to their compliance department with a single explanatory note. By Thursday, the firm had pulled his contract and filed a complaint with the Contractor Licensing Board. His liability insurance was open to review. Dana's firm learned about the situation through Derek, who'd sent a carefully worded account of the use of company vehicles and company time to the managing partner. Not a vindictive letter. Just facts, documented, with the investigator's timestamps attached. Dana was placed on administrative leave Friday morning. She came downstairs that Friday while I was making breakfast for my son and told me she had to tell me something important. She wanted to do it before I heard it elsewhere. I said I already knew. She asked how long I'd known. I told her Tuesday. She sat down at the kitchen table where she'd told me about our son's first steps when he took them while I was traveling, where we'd done his homework together for 4 years. She put her face in her hands. My son asked if Mom was okay. I told him Mom was having a hard week and that we'd talk about it later. He accepted that because 7-year-olds accept the explanations adults give them. That's both the beautiful thing about them and the thing that makes you feel the weight of every decision. Derek and Camille were in counseling. He hadn't decided yet. He told me this without embarrassment, which I respected. Rose had driven back north that same Tuesday night. She called me a week later to tell me Elliot had moved out and that she'd filed. She sounded tired but not broken. There's a difference. The divorce petition was filed on a Thursday, 5 weeks after that index card on my windshield. Dana contested nothing related to our son. She fought the asset division for a while, but the evidence of the condo search, the shared accounts she'd opened with Elliot for the apartment payments, and the salary she'd continued earning throughout made the case simple. The house sold. The retirement split according to statute. No alimony either direction. We were nearly equal earners, and we'd been deceiving each other for very different reasons. She kept the yoga membership. I don't know why the detail stuck with me. My son does 2 nights a week with her and alternating weekends. He adjusted better than I expected, which means he adjusted exactly as well as children do when the adults around them stay calm and consistent and don't use them as messengers. 6 months after the divorce was final, I got a text from Derek. He and Camille were separating. He said the counseling had clarified things they'd been avoiding long before Elliot came into the picture. He sounded, oddly, at peace. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment now, 12 minutes from my son's school. The 2nd bedroom has a bed with a dinosaur comforter and a collection of rocks he's been cataloging since last summer. He calls them his specimens. I don't text Dana unless it's about him. She doesn't text me unless it's about him. We are cordial at pickup and drop-off in the way that 2 people can be when they've decided that the child between them deserves better than whatever they feel like doing. Rose sent me a message on New Year's. She'd started a new job in a different city. She said she hoped I was doing well, that she meant it, and that she still thought about how surreal that Tuesday afternoon had been. I wrote back that I thought about it too. That it had been the strangest afternoon of my life and also, somehow, the most clarifying. Some doors you open yourself. Some get opened for you by a stranger who found your license plate number and decided that the truth was worth the trouble of sharing. I'm glad she did.